through the rearview mirror. What we can learn from the past to help navigate the AI storm. There's a technology out there that's coming for you. You can't escape it. It's already acquired too much momentum and its progress is accelerating. It's like watching a tidal wave. You can already see it out there on the horizon and it's coming fast for the land. And on the shoreline, people whirl around in panic, wondering what are they going to do and how are they going to cope with it. Companies are falling over themselves to try and get their strategic heads around it, what it might mean for productivity and profit, but also what havoc it might wreak in terms of their carefully constructed organizations. Will they be able to exploit this wave of opportunity which the technology seems to be bringing, or will they get swamped by it, losing out to others who are much more focused and agile? And governments worry about the huge social disruption likely to come as this technology cuts a wide swathe of jobs which can be replaced by smart technology embedded in an army of robots. Not only pairs of hands, but people with an extensive range of skills will be sidelined to the unemployment queues. And those new skills which might need urgent training to help the workforce adapt and exploit the positive benefits of productivity improvement offered by the technology, they're not clear. They're hard to plan for. Worst of all, the impact of this will not be felt in a handful of old sectors which can be exchanged for new ones. This wave of change threatens right across the board. Couple that with concerns about privacy, about ethics, about how to control something whose potential seems to rewrite the rules of the game. There's an urgent need for regulation, for setting up guidelines and guardrails, but a lack of understanding about where and how to construct these, and a distinct sense of trying to close stable doors after the horse has long ago made its escape and is now roaming free across the landscape. Not surprisingly, the media is full of stories about this, playing up the panic to the point where the technology is constantly center stage, the discourse around it doom-laden. A chicken-licking world in which there seems to be daily reminders that the sky's about to fall in. Headlines and programs titles like "Beware the March of the Robots" and "Now the Chips are Down," they do little to help an atmosphere of calm, critical appraisal. Does that sound familiar? One way perhaps of describing the current anxieties around AI? Well, actually, no. This version of technology angst is actually a much older ancestor. These scenes come not from the AI revolution, but its grandfather from 40 years ago, the microelectronics revolution. Another time when the efforts of thousands of white-coated scientists in physics labs all around the world converged to create the potential for widespread application of programmable devices, whose inexorable progress was enshrined in Moore's law, the power of the chips doubling and the costs falling year on year as they took over the world. But it didn't quite happen like that. Not like the doom-scrolling forecast, though there was undeniably a major shift across the techno-economic landscape of the time. First of all, it took longer than was predicted for the revolution to actually happen. And second, because the socio-economic context also changed, creating new ways of thinking about and working with the powerful core technology. So reviewing this experience might give us a clue as to how we could deal with the current commotion around AI. Whether it's governments planning employment and skills policy or companies trying to find a way through the maze, the message is clear. We need a strategic response, not a panic button. AI offers both threats and opportunities. Coming to terms with it will depend on a consistent, considered and forward-looking approach, something which research increasingly confirms. So looking back might be one thing we can do to help get a sense of perspective this time around. So here are 5 key lessons which we've learned from earlier revolutions. Number 1, they take a long time. Long live the revolution might be a useful political slogan, but it's a bit unnecessary in the world of technological revolutions. It's the name of the game that they're long-lived. They usually have the characteristics of what Andrew Hargadon neatly describes as long fuse, big bang. The impact takes a while to come through, but when it does, it shakes a lot of foundations. Whether we're talking about steam power, electricity, microelectronics, internet-enabled communications technology, it's the same story. An initial flurry of interest generated by some impressive technological breakthroughs, which then go in search of application. The process is actually one of mutual adaptation. Far from being a simple plug-and-play solution, powerful new technologies need to be adapted and configured before they have real impact. That's what takes the time, the learning about what and where the technology can best work, and the bringing to bear of suitable skills and organizational arrangements to match it. The emergence of electric power is a good example. For a long time, electric motors were used simply as replacements for the big steam engines which stood at the heart of every factory, linked by a complex series of pulleys and drive shafts to deliver power from a central source. It was only much later that the reframing around decentralized, smaller power units for individual machines emerged, and with it, the big productivity gains which the technology had to offer. Point number 2. These revolutions are not more of the same. They do change the game. Carlota Perez and Chris Freeman carried out extensive research looking at technological revolutions in detail, and they developed a helpful model to understand and work with them. They talk about the need to change the techno-economic paradigm, the way we frame both the technology and the wider socio-economic context in which it emerges. Yes, these revolutions have huge impact, but it not only takes time, it crucially also involves a reframing process. What Thomas Kuhn in his famous book on the structure of scientific revolutions calls a paradigm shift. Perez and Freeman's research began by picking up the ideas of a Russian economist, Nikolai Kondratiev, who noticed regular big shifts in economic growth which were associated with periodic surges in key technological fields. He called these long waves, and Perez and Freeman tried to explore what were the dynamics behind such significant shifts. Central to their argument is the need to think about this mutual adaptation of the technology and its socio-economic context, to manage implementation as a process of learning along convergent pathways. The upswing of the last Kondratiev wave could be traced back to the microelectronics surge in the 1980s and the advances in information and communication technologies which it enabled, essentially the internet world with which we're familiar today. But it wasn't a rapid transition, nor was it a purely technological one. Instead, parallel changes in society, such as the rise of social networks and globalization, these played a role in shaping the context. Now, in turn, feedback loops develop. For example, the rise of the mobile phone was driven in no small measure by school kids adopting and elaborating a simple messaging system originally developed as an engineer's tool for testing network connectivity. So by now, we should have learned that there's often a hype cycle to revolutionary technologies. They seem to promise everything, but getting the bang for the buck actually turns out to be a bit trickier. Back in the 1990s, the holy grail of computer-integrated manufacturing seemed tantalizingly within our grasp. We could have whole factories running under automatic control with the huge productivity gains that would imply, staffed by robots employing only one man and a dog to keep an eye on them, and the role of the man being simply there to feed the watchdog. Progress in key complementary areas of decision-making, design, administration, and manufacture offered to revolutionize any manufacturing business. We could automate not only within these spheres, but between them, sharing data, codifying everything into programs which talk to each other. Firms were falling over themselves to invest. Governments adding rich incentives in the form of loans and grants to accelerate the process. The bubble grew and grew. Except it didn't quite work out that way. Despite spending billions, productivity and performance hardly improved in manufacturing. And many surveys came to the same rather dismal conclusions. Firms were being disappointed. The gilt fell clearly off the promise. General Motors, one of the biggest companies in the world, placed a huge bet on being able to automate its way back to competitiveness, buying the world's largest software company at the time, EDS, to help it do so. But it still ended the decade in an inferior competitive position to Toyota. So that's not to say that the benefits weren't there, but rather that realizing them required a rethink, not a simple plug and play. It needed a strategic approach. Take the case of flexible manufacturing systems, mini factories employing robots and machine tools linked in integrated cells. This was potentially a game-changing technology. But as a detailed research article pointed out, the Japanese and Americans had very different views on implementation. For the US, it was a matter of automate to replace and de-skill. For the Japanese, it was a matter of complementing and enhancing skills with automation. And the productivity gains by the latter far exceeded the American technology push approach. So the key lesson we need to consider from this earlier experience, we need to consider major technological change in a wider context, one which involves skills, work organization, and many other factors. Lesson number 3. We need to understand what technology can and what it can't do. During the early days of the microelectronics revolution, the UK's National Economic Development Office, NEDO, convened a large-scale Delphi study into the potential implications of the technology and the policy challenges it might set up. Using its convening power as a tripartite organization representing government, business, and trade unions who were representing employee interests, it recruited a large community of experts to create their best guess as to the future with information technology. Delphi studies use such pictures to create an integrated view, which is then fed back and refined by the experts and gradually moves towards a shared, well-informed synthesis of views, a clear picture of how the future might be. Now, in this case, the results were published in a book, and they were used to support a wide range of action-orientated workshops with key decision makers and policy designers. 25 years later, the predicted experience was compared with what actually happened. And whilst there are many inevitable gaps and missed cues, many of those imagined futures did actually emerge. Much more important, the evidence-based input to policy making during the early days of the revolution helped create, adapt, and configure solutions to ameliorate key challenges and provide clarity about key problems. So this underlines the need for careful and informed assessment and future scanning when encountering technological revolutions. Despite the more ambitious claims about them, revolutionary technologies have limitations, and we need to temper the sensationalist reporting with more thoughtful technological analysis. The bridge between what might be possible and what can actually happen is a long one. Ethan Mollick talks nicely of a jagged frontier along which AI is both very advanced and proven, and also a very underdeveloped and experimental technology. Point number 4, progress is not linear. In the early days of the microelectronics and IT revolution, the first applications of the technology were essentially around doing what we already did better, using the technology as a substitute for what had gone before. It was only later along the Kondratiev wave that we moved to seeing new possibilities, to augment and extend what we did, to find new and powerful applications. And this maps onto the Freeman-Perez model, which sees early innovations as shaped by old paradigm thinking. It's only when the new paradigm becomes clear that the big transformational leaps occur. Think of the differences between the early days of the internet and the big shifts which came with Web 2.0. In particular, the move towards platforms, connecting and integrating activities in hitherto unimagined business models. Now, this suggests that we need to explore different ways of working with AI, moving from recruiting it to help automate clearly established current tasks through to using it in a co-pilot mode to augment and extend what we're currently capable of. Alan Brown, in a recent blog, offered a helpful framework in which he tries to map the dimensions of these different relationships between humans and AI in these different modes. He also adds a third mode, which he labels expert systems, where complex problems can be tackled in novel ways using a combination of human and AI insight. Now, significantly, while the early automation stage will displace jobs as AI takes over repetitive and standardized tasks, the other dimensions of AI possibilities offer scope for new roles and deployment of novel human skills in new kind of configurations. Point number 5, revolutions need strategy, not just tactics. A consequence of all these 4 previous lessons is that organizations need to think strategically about how and where they deploy AI, thinking not only of the short-term automation, but also exploring and experimenting with new ways of working. And with this comes a significant challenge to rethink skills profiles, organization structures, and operating models. Significantly, in the earlier IT and microelectronics revolution, it was often entrepreneurial newcomers who saw the real potential and were able to use the technology to advantage, while existing incumbents were often unable to move and change fast enough. They were locked into their old approaches. This is an urgent issue. A recent study by Gartner Group found that despite the belief amongst 74% of chief executives that AI will significantly impact their businesses, which is already up from 59% in 2023, nearly half of them report today that their investments so far have not met expectations. As Alan Brown comments, reviewing a number of similar reports, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of the latest AI breakthroughs. However, focusing on using the newest, shiniest technology rather than addressing real user needs is a recipe for failure. The most advanced AI isn't always the best solution for every problem. Successful AI projects demand strategic focus and long-term commitment. Industry leaders should identify enduring problems that align with organizational goals and commit product teams to solving them for a significant period of time. And the same is true at the policy level. AI may offer significant opportunities for improving productivity and quality of public services, but it will only do so with parallel radical rethinking of the way institutions operate. In both cases, the challenge is to find new business models rather than try to graft AI onto business as usual structures. Governments like the UK, who are looking to put AI in the foundation of radical change in key services like healthcare, need to do so in focused and planned fashion, not simply throwing up the fairy dust of AI and hoping. Perhaps one last lesson: we need responsible innovation. Of course, it's not simple. The past is always going to be an imperfect guide to the future, just as trying to drive a car by looking through the rear-view mirror would be a dangerous approach. And AI differs in a number of ways from things we've seen before. We still don't fully get what it can do. It's still evolving and at a breathtaking pace. And we need to factor in a significant difference to earlier revolutions. This technology can, to some extent, think for itself. It has generative capabilities. It can create what we can't fully imagine yet. Which means we need to take particular care and keep it very much under the spotlight. Responsible innovation is a relatively new label for an old idea, that we need to think hard about new technologies and do so ahead of their widespread deployment. In the early fluid phase of any innovation, there are opportunities to explore the design space which they offer, and to try and shape the development and diffusion of those technologies in ways which are beneficial rather than threatening to those involved. Richard Owen and Jack Stilgoe have developed a helpful framework for thinking about such a responsive approach, one which calls for 4 things. First of all, anticipation, systematically looking ahead and exploring potential scenarios, both positive and negative. And then reflexivity, being prepared to examine and challenge our approaches, revise them as we shape the technology. Inclusion, ensuring that the voices of all stakeholders are heard and their views and concerns are taken account of in development and diffusion. And responsiveness, making full use of the potential within a technology like AI to be adapted and configured. Now, these principles provide the potential for helping us construct guidelines and guardrails, but only if the organizations involved in developing and adopting AI are prepared to take them on board.